Hey, buddy, what's going on? No see, man. Yeah, man, good to see you. Yeah.
Hashtag, what's up? Hashtag, the sky. Hashtag, had to show off. Hashtag, but really though. Hashtag, how's reading week?
Hashtag, chilling like a villain. Hashtag, reading week. Hashtag, didn't read all week. Hashtag, you. Hashtag, you.
Hashtag, hashtag, I get it. Hashtag, crank that soldier boy. Hashtag, slept in all week. Hashtag, we are winter. Hashtag, Olympics. Hashtag, Doug Gold. Hashtag, she give me money. Hashtag,
well I need. Hashtag, go ski girl, get close. Hashtag, real question. Hashtag, Tim's or Starbucks. Hashtag, caffeine. Hashtag, we are students. Hashtag, broke life. Hashtag, Robarts looks like a peacock. Hashtag, mind blown.
Hashtag, true. Hashtag, not about the venties. Hashtag, looking for hashtag, free food on campus. Hashtag, we'll buy if the hashtag price is right. Hashtag, Alex Trebek. Hashtag, what is not textbooks?
Hashtag, hashtag, I feel you, bro. Hashtag, is this cotton? Hashtag, midterms are coming up. Hashtag, everyone's at Robarts. Hashtag, I get bore at Robarts. Hashtag, did I just say Borat? Hashtag, high five.
Hashtag, got the focus. Hashtag, love bell curves. Hashtag, multiple choice. Hashtag, not so much.
Hashtag, papers due. Hashtag, MLA or APA. Hashtag, do I need a title page? Hashtag, what's the word count? Hashtag, turn it in. Hashtag, turn it up. Hashtag, party. Hashtag, after midterms. Hashtag, woo!
Bleed blue, baby. Hashtag, if I was green, I would die. Hashtag, I love b-ball. Hashtag, what is love?
Hashtag, baby, don't hurt me. Hashtag,
no more.
Hashtag, ball later. Hashtag, for the win. Hashtag, switch me.
Hashtag, commuter life. Hashtag, red rocket. Hashtag, TDC. Hashtag, it's not that fast. Hashtag, just hold on, I'm going home. Hashtag, I'm sad though. Hashtag, still no matches on Tinder. Hashtag, swipe left or right. Hashtag, am I that bad looking?
Hashtag, you're a 10. Hashtag, on a bad day. Hashtag, I'd swipe right. Hashtag, stay strong. Hashtag, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Hashtag, Kanye said that.
Hashtag, thanks dude. Hashtag, grateful. Hashtag, BFFLFL.
Hashtag, no problem, buddy. Hashtag, I teach.
Come on, guys. I'm trying to study. Shut the up.
Hashtag, he didn't say. Hashtag, hashtag, stupid.
Hashtag, shut the up. Hashtag, can I actually join you guys?
Hashtag, no.